I told my childhood friend that I wouldn't date him because I don't want his mother as a mother-in-law. The days passed, and the weight of the situation continued to linger in my mind. I avoided, at all costs, the places where I might run into John or anyone who sided with Amy. But despite my efforts, the shadow of their words and the tension of the situation followed me like a ghost. One afternoon, as I walked through a nearby park to clear my mind, I saw John in the distance. He was alone, sitting on a bench, his head down, hands clasped together. My heart raced. I knew I would eventually have to talk to him, but I hadn't expected it to be so soon. I thought about leaving before he noticed me, but before I could decide, he lifted his head and our eyes met. There was no anger in his gaze, only a deep sadness that made a pang of guilt rise in my chest. "Can we talk?" he asked in a low voice, as if he feared my response. I took a deep breath before nodding. I sat beside him, leaving a cautious space between us. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. Only the sound of the leaves rustling in the wind and the distant murmur of other people in the park filled the silence. "I never wanted this to turn out this way," he finally said. "I never wanted my mother to react like that or for people to attack you." "I know," I replied, "but she did, and now we're here." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. He looked exhausted, as if he hadn't slept well in days. "I don't want to lose you," he said quietly. "Our friendship has always been important to me, more than you think." I felt a lump in my throat. I had thought about that too. John had been my best friend for so many years. But what was left now? Could we ever get back what we once had? "You're important to me too," I said. "But all of this, it hurt me more than I expected. It's not just what happened with your mother, but the way people reacted, the way they judged me without knowing the full story." John nodded slowly, as if he understood but didn't know how to fix it. "I can't force my mother to change," he said, "but I also don't want her attitude to destroy what we have." We fell silent again. There were no easy answers to this. After a few minutes, John stood up and looked at me with a serious expression. "I'm going to do something about this," he declared. "I don't know exactly what, but this can't stay like this." Before I could ask what he meant, he walked away, leaving me with more questions than answers. The following days were strange. I didn't hear from John, but something in the atmosphere shifted. The looks from people weren't as accusatory. The whispers died down. It seemed like the story was changing again, though I didn't know how or why. One day, I received a message from an unknown number. "Can we talk? Amy?" A chill ran down my spine as I read her name. I hadn't expected her to reach out to me. I didn't know what to do. I took a deep breath, stared at the phone screen for a few moments, and finally typed a response. "Where?" Amy's message left me paralyzed for a moment. I had expected attacks, more criticism, but not a request to talk. My first instinct was to ignore it. I didn't want to face her, not after everything she had said about me and my family. But at the same time, curiosity and the need to understand what she really wanted made my fingers type that simple response. "Where?" Minutes later, a new message notification appeared on my screen. "Cafe on the corner of Park Avenue, at 5. I checked the clock. I had 3 hours to decide if I was really going to face her. I spent the next few hours in an internal struggle. What if this was a trap? What if she just wanted to make me feel worse? Or maybe John had talked to her and something had changed? I couldn't be sure. Finally, I decided to go. If nothing else, at least I could see what she had to say. When I arrived at the cafe, Amy was already there, sitting at a table by the window, stirring her coffee with a spoon. When she saw me, she looked up and gestured for me to sit. I took a deep breath and walked to the table. "Thanks for coming," she said, without the hostility I had expected. I nodded, saying nothing. I studied her face, searching for signs of lies or manipulation, but what I saw was something different: exhaustion. She looked worn out, with dark circles under her eyes and a tense expression. "I don't want you to think this is an apology," she began, clasping her fingers together on the table. "But I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about what I said, about what John told me." I waited. "I never thought you would reject my son because of me," she continued. "When John told me, I felt hurt. I don't know if that's the right word, but it made me realize that maybe I've been unfair to you." I didn't respond right away. What she was saying sounded sincere, but doubt lingered. Finally, I said, "You weren't just unfair. You made me feel like I was worth nothing. And not just me, my family too." Amy closed her eyes for a moment, nodding slowly. I know, she said, and I don't expect you to forget it or forgive me. I just wanted you to know, to understand that it wasn't personal, even though I know it felt that way. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process her words. Was this enough? Could I simply accept that it had been a misunderstanding? I wasn't sure. So, what do you want? I finally asked. Amy sighed. I don't want John to lose you, she said. I've seen how he's been these past few days. He's not the same. I don't want to be the reason your friendship ends, but I also can't change what I already did. The conversation ended without a clear resolution. We parted politely, but without promises or expectations. I left with more questions than answers. That night, John called me. This time, I answered. I heard you saw my mother, he said with a mix of hope and nervousness. Yeah, I replied. She told me she doesn't want you to lose me. And you? What do you want? I didn't know how to answer right away. Wanting was complicated. Wanting him meant dealing with his mother, with the pain, with everything that had already happened. But it also meant reclaiming a part of my life that had been important to me. I don't know, I finally admitted. And still thinking. There was silence on the other end of the line. I understand, he said, but I hope that when you decide, you'll tell me. That call didn't close anything either. It just left more doors open, more paths to explore. And as the days passed, I realized that maybe that was what I needed. Time to figure out what I really wanted. The days passed without me making a definitive decision. The conversation with Amy kept replaying in my mind, and every time I thought about what John had said during that call, I felt a weight in my chest. Something inside me told me that I couldn't just walk away from him. But at the same time, all the harm his mother had caused me was still a barrier that was hard to ignore. One afternoon, while checking my phone, I saw a message from an unknown number. Can we talk? John? It surprised me that he was using a different number, but instead of wondering why, I simply replied, Where? Within minutes, I received an address. It was a park on the outskirts of the city, a place we used to go to as teenagers when we wanted to escape from everything. When I arrived, I saw him standing by a tree, looking out at the lake with his hands in his pockets. He turned when I approached and gave me a faint smile. Thanks for coming, he said. I nodded and crossed my arms, waiting for him to speak. John sighed and looked at the ground before lifting his gaze again. I didn't want to keep waiting, he admitted. It hurts not to talk to you like we used to. I feel like I'm losing you, and I don't want that to happen. His words touched me, but they also reminded me why I was in this situation. It's not that easy, John, I said. I can't just forget everything that happened. I know, he admitted, but I want to do something to fix it. I don't want my mother to hurt you anymore, but I also don't want what she did to separate us. I stayed silent, watching how the lake's water reflected the sunlight. I talked to her again, John continued. I told her that what she did was wrong, that she shouldn't have said those things about you and your family. I don't expect this to fix everything overnight, but I want you to know that I don't agree with her. I never did. I looked at him, searching for any sign of doubt in his eyes, but all I saw was sincerity. It was hard to process that he was standing up to his mother for me. Thank you, I murmured. John let out a soft, almost nostalgic laugh. You know, when we were kids, I always thought nothing could separate us, he said. We were always together, no matter what. I want us to go back to that. I'm not saying we should forget the past, but I want us to find a way to move forward. I felt a lump in my throat. I had wanted to hear something like that for a long time, but reality was more complicated. I want that too, I admitted in a quiet voice, but I need time. John nodded, as if he had already expected that. Take all the time you need, he said. I just want you to know that I'll be here waiting when you're ready. We stayed in silence, enjoying the tranquility of the park, with no need for words. Although there were no definitive answers, at least now I knew that John was willing to fight for our friendship. Maybe, just maybe, there could be a way to rebuild what we had lost. The following days were a mix of confusion and reflection. The conversation with John had stirred up buried feelings, but it had also awakened new doubts. Could I trust that things would truly change? Was it enough that John was on my side if his mother remained an unshakable presence in his life? I didn't want to put him in a position where he had to choose, but at the same time, I couldn't ignore the wound that Amy had left in me. One afternoon, while walking through the city with no clear direction, my phone vibrated. It was a message from John. I'm inviting you to dinner. Just you and me, to talk, to try to understand each other better. I stopped in my tracks. Part of me wanted to say no, that I wasn't ready for another emotionally charged conversation. But another part, the part that still valued the friendship we had, wanted to try. With a sigh, I replied, "All right, tell me the time and place." Night came quickly. John had chosen a small restaurant, one of those that weren't fancy, but had a warm and cozy atmosphere. When I arrived, he was already there, waiting for me at a table by the window. He greeted me with a smile, but in his eyes, I saw a mix of nervousness and hope. I sat across from him, and for a few minutes, neither of us said anything. "Thanks for coming." He finally broke the silence. "I guess we had to talk," I replied, feeling a little out of place. John nodded and stared at his glass of water before speaking. "I still don't know exactly how to fix this," he said, "but I want you to know that I'm trying. Not just for me, but for you, because I care about our relationship." I watched his expression as he spoke. He didn't seem to be saying empty words. There was a sincerity in his tone that made me want to let my guard down a little. "I want to believe we can get back what we had too," I admitted softly. "But it's not just a matter of wanting it. Amy is still a problem. What she said, what she did. It's not something I can just forget." John nodded slowly, as if he had already anticipated my response. "I understand," he said. "I'm not going to ask you to forget, because I know that wouldn't be fair. But I do want to ask you to give me a chance to show you that things can change." "And how do you plan to do that?" I asked with a hint of skepticism. John took a deep breath before responding. "I talked to my mother again," he admitted. "I made it clear to her that I won't allow her to treat you that way anymore. That if she wants to continue being part of my life, she has to respect my decisions and the people I care about." His statement took me by surprise. I had never imagined he would stand up to his mother like that. He had always been close to her, always sought her approval. Knowing that he was willing to set boundaries for me was something I hadn't expected. "And what did she say?" I asked, unable to hide my curiosity. John grimaced. "It wasn't easy. She got upset, tried to make me feel guilty, but in the end, I think she understood that I was serious. I don't expect her to change overnight, but at least now she knows I won't tolerate her disrespecting you." I lowered my gaze to my plate, processing his words. Part of me wanted to believe him, to trust that what he was saying was true, and that he was really willing to do what it took to protect our relationship. But another part still felt that fear, that doubt that everything could happen all over again. "I appreciate what you did," I finally said. "Really, but I need time to see if things actually change." John nodded, his expression showing understanding. "I get it," he said. "Take all the time you need. I won't pressure you. I just want you to know that I'll be here waiting." Dinner continued on a lighter note after that. We talked about more trivial things, reminisced about old memories, laughed a little. For a moment, it almost felt like everything was back to normal. When we said goodbye, I felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. There were no definitive answers, but there was a small glimmer of hope that maybe with time, we could find a way to move forward. As I walked home, my phone vibrated with a message from John. "Thanks for giving me a chance to talk. It means a lot to me." I read it several times before replying. "I appreciate what you're trying to do. Let's see how things go." I knew nothing was fully resolved, but for the first time in a long while, I felt that maybe, just maybe, things could start to change. The weeks passed, and although the wounds of the past hadn't completely faded, something inside me began to change. John stayed true to his word. He didn't pressure me, didn't insist that I make a quick decision. He was just there, present, willing to give me the time I needed. On the other hand, Amy's attitude also seemed to take an unexpected turn. There were no direct apologies, no sudden forced attempts at reconciliation, but the atmosphere relaxed. The biting comments stopped, and our mutual friend group was no longer a constant source of tension. Maybe, after all, things really could change. One afternoon, as I walked through the park where I had met John some time ago, I stopped in front of the lake and let the cool breeze clear my thoughts. I had spent the past few days evaluating what I wanted to do, what I truly felt. And for the first time in a long while, I had a clear answer. That night, I picked up my phone and sent John a message. "Can we meet?" His response came almost immediately. "Always." We met at the same cafe where we had talked before. John was sitting at the same table by the window, But this time, his expression wasn't tense, it was hopeful. I sat across from him and took a deep breath before speaking. "I've thought a lot about everything," I began. "About you, about Amy, about what has happened between us. And I think I finally have my answer." John looked at me, expectant but silent, letting me continue. "I can't change the past," I went on, "but I also don't want it to define us anymore. I'm still afraid that things might go back to how they were before, but I can also see that you've made a real effort. And that means a lot to me." His lips curled into a smile, but he waited for me to finish. "So yes," I finally said, "I want to try. I want us to move forward together." John exhaled, as if he had been holding his breath all this time. Then, without saying a word, he gently took my hand. "You won't regret it," he promised softly. I didn't know if that was true, if the future would be as simple as we wanted it to be. But in that moment, I decided to stop overthinking and just trust. With time, things found their balance. My relationship with John evolved naturally, without rush or impossible expectations. Amy and I were never close, but we learned to coexist without resentment. And most importantly, I learned that my happiness didn't depend on others. It depended on my ability to choose what was best for me. And so, what was once a story filled with uncertainty and pain found its ending. Not perfect, not a fairy tale, but real. And in the end, that was all I needed.